So if you've seen my blog and videos in the past, you know I've talked about HOAs and I've described them a little bit. And there's a lot of discussion out there. Are HOAs good? Are they bad? Well, I just went through the HOA document for the neighborhood that we're buying into, and I want to share some of the details around that. But before I do, let's talk a little bit about what the real purpose is of having an HOA. An HOA isn't created just because your nosy neighbors want to tell you how to rule your life, right? In the horror stories you hear is somebody's going to come over with a ruler and measure the blades of grass on your front yard, and then you're going to get a fine because you're a quarter of an inch too tall. All that stuff. And maybe that exists in some areas, and I'm sure it probably does. But let's understand what the purpose is of these HOAs. The purpose of these HOAs is to protect the value of the properties in the neighborhood. Now, most HOAs don't let you put a for sale sign out in front of your house. So you never know when a house is up for sale. And what will happen is prospective buyers will drive through the neighborhood trying to find the houses that are for sale. And as they're driving through the neighborhood, they want to see a nice looking neighborhood. And if you've got a house for sale, you want it to be presented nicely. So this allows you to have a little bit of control over that. As the people are coming through the neighborhood, looking at the houses, looking for the house that they might be interested in buying. Okay? We don't want to see garage doors up and garages filled with crap. We don't want to see weeds growing all over the place. We don't want to see shrubs that haven't been taken care of, or broken down cars in the driveway. We want to create an environment that protects everybody's investment. Now, typically, houses sell very quickly in Florida, and a lot of people don't buy a house for it to be their forever home. They're going to live in a place for a while, and then they'll sell that and they'll move to the next. So typically what you will see, maybe more than other areas, is a pretty big turnover in houses. So at any given time, there could be quite a few houses for sale in your neighborhood. So again, the HOAs are there to protect your house value, and so that you'll be able to sell it. It's also to protect a quality of life kind of an issue, right? So if your neighbor's dog is barking all night, and who hasn't had that kind of an encounter, you should be able to deal with that in a reasonable, decent way. If your neighbor is doing something loud, carrying on loud music, having parties every weekend, whatever the case may be, you shouldn't have to confront your neighbor. There should be an understanding between all the neighbors on how we're all going to live together in this neighborhood. So, I get it. I read a lot about people saying, I'm never going to have an HOA. I don't want other people telling me what I'm allowed to do, what I can do, what I can't do. Sounds like communism, all this other stuff. Hey, if HOAs aren't for you, they're not for you. But I think as long as you can find a reasonable HOA, something that isn't going to be overly oppressive, I think it's okay. And I think in the neighborhood we're buying into, according to the HOA document, it looks fairly reasonable. So I'm going to tell you some of the things that I found in this HOA document. So, like many HOAs, this HOA is ran by 3 to 5 directors, and they're led by a president, and there's a vice president, and then there's a treasurer and a secretary, and those various roles. Some people can be a treasurer and a secretary, whatever. I don't care. None of that matters to me. The point is that the HOA is ran by a group of people that you elect to go run it. Their terms last for a year. And if you want to be on the HOA, you just run for a seat. If you don't like who's on there, you vote for somebody else. Now, the reality of it is that it's probably going to be tough to kick somebody out who's already in the HOA and they've been there for a while. So if you don't like them, your best approach is probably going to be to find a way to get along with them and not create an enemy. But, you know, that's the reality. The way we all think of it is that you can join the HOA and have a vote in what's happening. Okay. Now, most HOAs want to control the way your property looks from the street. Again, people are driving around, they're looking for houses to buy, so they want some consistency, some uniformity to the neighborhood. They don't want you to go and put on some third-story tower with spikes on it and, you know, whatever else. They don't want you to put a ham radio antenna sticking 100 feet into the air in your front yard. Okay, they want to have it to look like, generally like all the other neighborhoods or all the other houses in the neighborhood. And I'm not talking cookie cutter. I'm just talking about some basic kinds of things. They're going to want maybe all the houses to be of a similar size. They don't want any houses smaller than, in this neighborhood, they don't want any houses smaller than, I think it was 1,800 square feet, not including the garage. Okay, so they don't want those mini houses coming in. They also don't want you to buy a lot and put a trailer in it and live in a trailer. Okay, they want houses, substantial houses, you know, that kind of a thing. So therefore, anytime you want to make a change to your property, it has to be okayed by the architectural board. The architectural board will take a look at it and say, yeah, that fits into the aesthetics of our neighborhood. Or they'll say, well, instead of doing that, you know, we prefer if you did something else that might be just as good. And case in point, if you want to put a fence up, okay, fences make for great neighbors. The HOA in this neighborhood will not allow you to put up a perimeter fence. Now, a perimeter fence means you're going to encircle your entire property, the front yard, the backyard, the side yard, the whole thing with a fence. Now, you can imagine you could build an 8-foot wall around your house, right? All the way around. But the HOA says, no, we're not going to have people do that. If you want to put a fence in your backyard, fence off your backyard area, knock yourself out. Just go to the architectural board and say, yeah, this is what I'm thinking about doing. They'll say, cool, do it. Now, they may say, what kind of material they want to see used. You might go and say, I want to use black wrought iron fencing. And they might say, ew, that's going to look ugly. How about we do something else? How about white vinyl fencing or something like that? Now, of course, if your heart is sold on a certain kind of fencing, the architectural board tells you no, yeah, you're going to be pissed. But that's what they do, and that's their role. And you can think of it likewise. You don't want your next door neighbor doing something like putting up a pink, rosy chain link fence all around their yard. It would look terrible, right? Now, do you have a right to tell your neighbor what they're allowed to do? Well, in an HOA, yeah, you kind of do, because you need to protect your home value, and by doing that, you're protecting their home value, and everybody gets along. So, before you get your heart set on any architectural changes, anything changes to your house, if you want to change your front door, if you want to paint something a little bit a different color, or any of that stuff, before you get your heart set, just pass it by the architectural board and say, hey, is this going to be a problem? Or say, I'd like to do this, what are my options? Yeah, I think that's a great way to get along. Now, check back with me in about a year, and I will tell you whether or not I still feel the way I feel after I've been in an HOA for a period of time. Continuing on with the HOA document. Um, if there's a complaint about your landscaping, let's say you're not trimming the hedges, the palm trees need to be pruned all the time, whatever, you're not having your yard mowed the way it should be, you will receive a letter of complaint, and you have 20 days to fix it. If you don't fix it within 20 days, the HOA is going to send somebody over to fix it and then charge you for fixing it. Now, you have to pay all those fees that the HOA gives you, and this would be considered a fee. If you don't pay those fees, they can put a lien on your house, and then they can eventually foreclose on that lien and take your house away from you. So you want to play nicely in these situations. If you get a notice that you've got something that isn't up to snuff, you're going to want to fix it whether you want to or not, just to avoid having any problems. And I'm sure there's situations, because in every single human interaction, there's going to be that neighbor who gets away with everything and you can't get away with, a single thing at all. The guy down the street, he hasn't trimmed his hedges in 5 years, but every time I miss a week, somebody's digging me for it. Look, we're dealing with humans here. That guy down the street, he might have a special relationship with somebody. He might have been able to get some kind of special deal that you don't have, and it might be unfair, but it's life. Try not to dwell on that stuff too much. Now, something else I've talked about with HOAs, and this exists in the neighborhood I'm looking at too, is the special assessment fee. If there's a repair that has to be done, let's say a street or something that the HOA is responsible for, let's stay specific to just that, then that cost will be passed on to all the homeowners, and everybody will have to pay some kind of equitable amount toward whatever that repair is. Okay, another rule this place has is no overnight parking of your cars on the street in front of an adjacent lot. I'm not really sure what the hell that means. I guess you could park your car in front of your house, in front of your lot, as long as it's not in front of an adjacent lot. You can put it in the street overnight. I don't know. Okay, if you need to have a moving truck or a pod, they don't want that stuff sitting around for a week in your driveway. They want you to get it, unload it, and get rid of it. So they give you 24 hours to have, let's say it's a pod. The pod is delivered, you empty it, you get rid of it in 24 hours. That's what they ask for. Now, I don't know, but I suspect that if it's going to take longer than 24 hours, you'd probably do well just to contact the HOA and say, I'm going to need a little bit more than 24 hours. Is that going to be a problem? And they'll probably, if they're a reasonable group of people, I imagine they're going to come back and say, well, okay, this time, fine, but let's try to keep it to 24 hours going forward, right? That's, some people say, well, it's better to beg for forgiveness afterwards than to ask for permission. And I think in these kinds of situations, you can go a long ways just by reaching out to somebody and making sure everything's going to be okay with what you're doing. They don't want you repairing your car in your driveway. Now, you can pull the car into your garage and repair it, but when somebody's driving by and looking at the neighborhood, they don't want to see your hood up with engine parts all over the place or whatever, and you're trying to fix your car. That's not the kind of impression they want to give out. Next, they don't want you drying your clothes outside on a line. I don't know. I guess I haven't seen too much of that in my life. Of my younger years, maybe, but people that I've seen really don't dry their clothes out on a line anymore. I suppose it could be annoying. I mean, you've got a pool. You might want to set your pool towels out so they dry. But, you know, what kind of a big deal is this? If it's in your backyard and it's away so nobody can see it, who cares? But I can certainly understand if from the road you can see somebody's underwear hanging on a line, blowing in the breeze. Yeah, that might not be so cool. Unless it was my underwear, which is primo. Next up, satellite dishes and TV antennas. Can't put them on the front of the house. You can put them on the back of the house. And if it's an antenna, they've got restrictions on how tall and big it can be. But back of the house, as long as you can't see it from the street, they don't care. If you can see it from the street, it's a problem. As I mentioned before, no for sale signs in the front yards. Also, no other kinds of signs either. So they don't want you selling things. They don't want political signs out there. You can't have like Girl Scout cookies, stop here, get your Girl Scout cookies, right? You can't say vote Republican, vote Democrat. They don't want any of that kind of stuff out in people's front yards. If you want to put a structure on your property, let's say it's a shed, you have to get approval from the architectural board. And I don't know this for a fact, but it just my gut feeling tells me that as long as you can't see the shed from the road, and it's not going to be a nuisance for your neighbor, I don't think anybody's going to care. But they need to check that out just to make sure. Now, you might be in an HOA that says absolutely no sheds in this neighborhood whatsoever, in which case you're never going to get an exception. But in my case, there are sheds, and the HOA just wants to make sure that you're not going to cause a problem by putting a shed on your land. Now, this HOA tells you what kind of grass you're allowed to use on your lawn. Okay, you can use, it says St. Augustine or Bahaia, Bhaia grass. I haven't heard of that one. Okay, fine. I don't care. Whatever. I mean, I'm sure that matters to some people. Doesn't matter at all to me. I know the St. Augustine grass isn't as comfortable when you walk across it, but there's bigger problems in the world than what kind of grass is growing in my yard, honestly. Okay, next one. If your neighbor issues a complaint about you, in other words, your neighbor says, hey, you're violating one of the covenants. And if that neighbor, in the practice of issuing that complaint, has to involve an attorney, then they can have you pay their attorney fees. Now, they have to be reasonable attorney fees, and they have to be necessary attorney fees. So if you do something that's in violation, that makes your neighbor upset, you may end up having to pay their lawyer. So how do you avoid that? Avoid breaking rules that are going to piss your neighbors off, I guess. The next thing with my HOA is this HOA has conservation areas. The conservation areas are like wetlands. It's areas where there's not going to be houses built. And my house happens to sit right on the edge of a conservation area, which is awesome. And they have rules about how the conservation areas can be used and what you can and can't do with them. So the conservation areas are managed by a group from the county. And you can't do things like go dump your trash in there. You can't block access to the conservation areas. just common sense kind of things that even though they seem like common sense, somebody would probably do something that, put their car in the way or put up a fence or do something that would block access. So what are you going to do? So that's the entire HOA. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of other details in the roughly 10 or 11 pages, but that's the most. That's pretty much it. So does that sound like communism to you? Does that sound like overly oppressive HOA? Well, I have read some HOA documents that, yeah, this sounded that way. Like the HOA document that said, if somebody complains about your dog, you'll have 72 hours to get rid of it. Can you imagine that? Yeah, getting a knock on your door. Lady next door said your dog was barking yesterday afternoon, so you have until Saturday to get rid of the dog. Yeah, and dogs are members of families, and you can't just do that with a dog. Well, luckily this HOA doesn't mention anything like that. The plus side is I don't have to worry if my dog's a nuisance. The negative side is if I've got a neighbor who does have a dog that's a nuisance, well, the HOA is not going to address that. Okay, so that covers the HOA of the neighborhood that has the house that I'm purchasing into. I hope seeing an example of an HOA was useful. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Otherwise, thank you for watching.